As we continue working with the bubble charts, one of the things that we need to do is filter our data and give the user an option to visualize different pieces of data. And before we jump into building the card view, I want to focus on how to just really simple interaction, how to let a user choose, show me the data from Duke, show me the data from UNC or Wake Med, click and choose. And then we'll talk about how to build a reusable tooltip that will show up no matter which chart we're looking at in the next video. So this video, we're just going to focus on how do we filter that data down, because it's going to require a little bit of work here to massage the data around and get it all wired up correctly. So I'm going to pull up a terminal here, and we'll just fire off npm, oh, sorry, wrong directory. We'll jump into our hospital data directory. So I'm here next to package.json. That's what's important. Fire off that npm start command. So started from scratch here. Always double checking. We didn't break anything. Our tables are working. We come here. We have our bubble chart. So all I want to do now, I just want to stub in 3 checkboxes here above the chart that control which data we're going to display. So we will go in. So if this is all rolled up for you, we're in hospital data, source, components, bubble chart, index.js. I'll just pull this terminal down out of the way for a minute. And the first thing we want to do, we'll just go down here and look inside where we're rendering this syntax for our component. We have our HTML here. And a checkbox is an input. So we'll just make an input type equals checkbox. And we can set that to checked, and it will check that box by default. So I'll just hit save. Back over here, so we see there's the checkbox that's checked, and we can't uncheck it. So I'm clicking, and I can't uncheck it. So that's a React thing. We're going to fix that. So we have an input type checkbox. We say it's checked. So let's give this an ID, and let's say this will be our Duke CB for checkbox. So we have our Duke checkbox here. We're going to wrap this in a label tag. And normally with a label tag, if we were just writing plain HTML, not JSX, you would say for equals, and you would give it the ID of the input that you are labeling. So we get this little warning here. You might have saw it pop up. Let's see if I can get it to pop. Label, da-da-da-da-da. Let's see, we're on the properties. I don't know if it's going to prompt for it, but this isn't valid JSX. Let's see if it prompts if I save it. Nope, but it'll complain in the front end. So within JSX, when we're working with React, this is actually HTML4 with a capital F. And that now ties this label to this input. And so we can put some text in here. So we can say Duke and hit save. And the important part of that label, what it lets us do, again, you can't uncheck this yet, but we'll be able to click on the word Duke and it'll uncheck that box. So it ties this text to that input and lets us control that input by clicking on the text. It's a much nicer user experience. So let's fix this checked, how to set whether or not this is checked. So let's just go up here, and we've got our constructor. I'm going to expand that. In these properties, everything we're setting, instead of just putting data and those sorts of things just onto the component itself, we need to start using state. And so we'll just set our initial state. Oops. Let's be this.state. And so we'll set that initial state with an object. And we'll just call this property, and that's even quotes, show Duke. And we'll set it to true. And then we'll put our data in the state. And so since we already have it defined, we can just say this.state, and then data is equal to this.data. So we stub those in, and then we go back to our checkbox. We're going to say checked. We're actually going to put that equal to, and then we want to go to JavaScript. So we're writing HTML, we're writing JSX in here. So we do curly braces to say, hey, Actually, I want you to go over to back and run this as JavaScript. We'll say this dot, oops, this dot state dot, oops, show Duke. So now whether or not this is checked is tied to the state. So I'm going to hit save, go back over here. We can see it's checked. Now I still can't uncheck it. I'm clicking on it. Still can't uncheck it. I can go back to the top up here. I can say show Duke is false. Save that. Go over. And now it's unchecked. Now I still can't check it back. So we have to now tie that checkbox. I'm going to set this to true. By default, we're going to show all the data. So I have to somehow control this state and change this state. And so what we want is on this input, let's bring these down, put these on each on their own line where we can read them. We want to control what happens when this input changes. So we want to say on change is going to be equal to, we're going to run some function. So we'll just say this dot toggle Duke. And so this will be a function. We haven't written it yet. So we'll stub this in as a method. And I'll put it above this. I'll leave that component did mount there for a second. So we will say toggle Duke. We'll make that a method. It'll receive the event. We don't necessarily need the event. I'll show you why. So this onChange calls this.toggle Duke. Now, if we want to manipulate things in here in the same context of this component, which we do, when we toggle Duke, we want to update the state. So we want to say, whenever toggle Duke is called, we want to say this.set state, and we want to set the state, show Duke, and then here's a little trick. We put an exclamation point in front of this to say not show Duke. So because show Duke is a Boolean value, by putting that exclamation point in front of it, it inverts it. So the first time it's true, so you call toggle Duke, and then it calls set state, set show Duke to not true, which is false. So then when it's not being shown, and we call toggle Duke, it comes in as a show Duke, set it to not false, which is true. So that's a little tip there. It's a little shorthand. That's how you just flip a Boolean flag back and forth if you want to toggle it. Just set the same value back. So on change, this will toggle Duke. Now the problem is this is a reference to this component. However, when this actually fires, this is going to be firing once it's been rendered on the page, and we lose the context. We lose the binding that this knows about this component. And so we just want to put on the end of this, we just want to bind. So we're still going to call that function. We want to bind it to this. And so you just remember that pattern. And where do I have show Duke's not defined? Oh, sorry. Yeah, here. That'd be this dot state dot show Duke. Sorry. So we want to read the current value of the state and set it to the opposite. And so again, we put this bind down here. So binding this, when this code is evaluated, this has a reference to our component. So we are binding this function over. And so it just lets us do things inside this function like say this.setState and reference this.state. So I'm just going to save that. We'll go over here. And now when I click on it, I can turn the checkbox on and off. And I'm actually manipulating the React state. And so when we hit inspect and we go to the React tab, and we'll just hit the little crosshairs here and drill in on the bubble chart. Where are we at? Let's go up. Click on the bubble chart component here. We can see the state, and you can see show Duke is true and it's checked. So when I uncheck it down here, it unchecks it in the application. And when I check it here, it checks it in the application. Same thing when I go up here, you see that state being manipulated. The other thing is noticing here, I'm clicking over on the word. And so that's super important for users. That's why we use labels. Now there's another trick we'll do later, but by using a label, we can hide this physical input, but we'll always be able to reference that value. So we can make a custom checkbox, and we don't mess with the styles for this. We can just pop an icon in and out for checked or unchecked. So that gets us started. Let's make 3 of those, 1 for each hospital. So we'll just start up here at the top, copy this, and so we'll have a show Duke a show UNC, and a show Wake Forest. We'll hit save on that. Or, sorry, not Wake Forest. Oops, Wake Med. There we go. Show Duke, show UNC, show Wake Med. Now we'll make 2 more toggle functions. So we will toggle Duke, we will toggle UNC, we will toggle Wake Med. So here we are setting show UNC, and here we are setting show Wake Med, and that is the opposite of the state. This dot state show UNC, and this dot state show Wake Med. And now we're setting everything. Notice we're setting all these to true because our initial data contains all of the data set. So that's why we're setting all these to true. We initially show our end user all the data. So we show all the checkboxes checked to represent that. So now we will grab this entire chunk of JSX, paste that in twice. I'm going to just, I'm going to put some line breaks in here so that this is vertical. You could put these in a UL. Lots of options, but we'll just put in some breaks and put them on separate lines there. And so we now have a UNC checkbox. So this will be UNC. And we change the ID here, UNC CB. And this will be tied to show UNC. And when you click it, you will toggle UNC. And show Wake Med. This is Wake Med. And this is the Wake Med checkbox. And we are toggling Wake Med. So I think I got all those. Hit save, it compiled. Let's come over here. We have 3 checkboxes. I can click all of them. I feel like as a user, it makes more sense if the checkboxes go on the left side. It'll make them, instead of the checkbox kind of jumping around the page. So let's just move those around really quick. We're just going to grab this text and drop it after the input for each of these. So still within the label tag, just after the input. There we go. I like that a little better. It looks a little better. So now I can click through these. Now it doesn't do anything yet. And so the next thing we want to do is filter down our data when these change. So we've got a lot of wiring up that we need to manage. And we will start at the top. Let's see what we've done here. So we're in the constructor. We have our Duke data, UNC data, and Wake Med data. We are assigning a name to each of those. Let's go ahead and make a key. So we're putting all of this data in one big array, and we're going to map those over with a data join in D3. And so when we do those data joins, it needs some sort of key that it can keep track of, saying this piece of data is tied to this element. And let's see. Oops, that's not a comma. For the key, kind of stub that in there. Let's just do this. So we have the name set. So let's set the key to r.name plus r.drg code. So that's going to make this unique across these. So we will have, like, if this was the first item, this would say Duke 32 if the DRG code was 32. And so we can just actually copy and paste this for all of these. So then we would have UNC 32. So we end up with a unique key across all 3 data sets by pulling in that name and the code. So now that we have those keyed together, let's look at what's going on when we draw this chart. We're using the data from this .data here. So let's stop doing that. I'm just going to delete this. Or I don't want to delete it. I'm going to hang on to how we create that. But let's stop putting data on here in its entirety, and let's think, what do we need to hang on to filter this? Well, we will need, I guess what we'll do instead of this, I'm going to paste this back in. So we're going to set a property here. We'll say this dot full data. So there's the full data set and we'll hang on to that. And then I want to set the state, and instead of doing this.data and just turning this into this.full data, I'm actually going to call slice on this. So that's just going to return a copy of this array. That way, if we change anything on here, it's not mutating it. So this.full data will always be this kind of like golden record set that we don't have to worry about. It's always set to all the original data where we started. From here on out, the state will be set. We'll set the data on the state, and it starts with a copy of the full data set, which means when we draw our chart, we don't want to use this.data anymore. We want the data to be this.state.data. So now we'll be able to set the state and change that and redraw the chart. So I'm just hit save here. Nothing should have changed. That's good. So our graph is still drawing down here. Everything should roll down from data. Should be used. We shouldn't have this.data used in here. I think the next thing we need to do is when we toggle one of these data sets, we're going to have to update the state. So let's just make a function. Let's filter data. And we only want to call set state one time. So when I uncheck or I check one of those boxes, I don't want to call set state right here. I want to set that in the state, but I also want to filter the data. So instead of calling this.setState and passing this in, let's instead call this.filterData. And then filter data will just take this new state. So that's what we're telling it. We're passing in a new state. So these, instead of explicitly setting the state, we're going to say, hey, filter the data, and here's the new state where the world lives. So now let's do something. Let's set new state. We're just going to redefine that variable. And so you may have seen this in some of the other sample code. We're going to do object destructuring and spreads, the spread operator. So we're going to say new state is equal to 1, 2, 3 periods this dot state. So we're destructuring and copying everything out of this dot state, which is a JavaScript object. And then we're going to do 1, 2, 3 dots new state. And these evaluate in order. So anything that's defined in new state is going to override anything in this dot state. And we're saving that still in the same variable name, new state. And we know when we're done, so I'm going to put a couple blank lines in here. Once we're finally done, we'll say this dot set state to the new state. But in between here, we need to actually filter our data. So new data is going to be equal to this dot full data dot, there's one, this works like map, dot filter. And so filter is going to run this function. So we're going to pass in R for record. So we're going to do something for each record in the full data set. And if this function returns true, this record will get brought into the new data array, because this full data is an array. It has a filter method. This function needs to return a true or false statement. So we're going to do a couple Boolean evaluations. So we're going to just return, and I'm going to stub in some parentheses here. And we want to return, let's say you unchecked Duke. So you no longer want to show Duke. So we're going to evaluate first this Duke expression. So we're going to return R for this record, R.name, triple equals Duke, and, so two and signs, R.name is Duke, the triple equals Duke, and new state, right, where we've mutated this state, it's potentially updated from down here, and new state dot show Duke. And so that, if that is true, so this is evaluating, this will return true if the name of this record is Duke and the new state dot show Duke is true. Then we do two pipes over here, two pipe characters, vertical bars. That means or. And so we do another statement under here. We say R.name triple equals UNC. So if this record's name is UNC and the new state dot show UNC, or another or statement. Here's our last one. R dot name triple equals Wake Med and new state dot show Wake Med. All right, so we're not actually putting any explicits. What I mess up? Got an or name. New data is not defined. Yep, just missing this let new data. All right, here we go. So once at the very end here, we'll say new state, because this is what we're going to set the new state to, dot data equals new data. And so it saves and it runs. And so let's go over here and I'm going to click inspect. I'm going to go to React tab. I'm going to scroll up at my source code here, or I can use the little target, the little crosshairs, and click on this, but we're looking for our bubble chart component. And so notice our data array, 2,000 elements. I'm going to uncheck Duke. So show Duke is now set to false. Look at our array. So our data is now down to 1,300 items. I'm going to uncheck show Wake Med. Did our array update? It didn't. So changing it here didn't work, but over here, where we're actually firing on that toggle, now we're down to 715. And if I uncheck UNC, we're down to 0 items. So this is working. It's filtering our data. Let's leave Duke checked and let's actually look inside data and see what the state is. Make sure this is showing a Duke item. Let's see. Oh, let's see where. Oh, we're missing name. That's interesting. Oh, there. Did it go down? Yeah, there we go. Key and name. So there's our DRG code 2. There's our key, Duke 2. Name is Duke. So yeah, that all looks good. So we see that the filtering is working, but it doesn't actually update our graph. So just like we were using these lifecycle functions, when our component did mount for the first time, we create an SVG and we draw a chart. There's another lifecycle function, so I'm just copy and paste this. Instead of component did mount, we're going to say component did update. And so this is going to get called if the state changes and this component needs to be updated. Now we don't need to recreate a whole new SVG. We just need to draw a chart. Right? So I'll hit save. It's going to fail to compile because this SVG is not defined. So here, when component did mount, we can just cheat to win here. We can just say this.svg is equal to this.create SVG, or even better, we just delete this. As long as we know you have to call this.create SVG to get an SVG, then we can get rid of passing SVG into draw chart. And so let's update draw chart first. And here we're referencing SVG where it's passed in. Let's delete that parameter and let's just change this to this.svg and then create SVG. Instead of returning, it just sets this.svg equal to the D3 SVG element it makes. So we'll go back over here and look. Oh yeah, still working. I'm going to uncheck Duke. No changes yet. Uncheck UNC, no changes. Uncheck Wake Med, check it back, no changes. So to understand what's going on, we're going to have to look inside draw chart. So we're going to just double check that component did update is calling this.draw chart, which we confirm. So inside this.draw chart, we look through here. We only have an enter method defined. And we're only hanging on to this leaf variable. So I'm going to put a couple blank lines in here. I'm going to make a new variable, call it groups. So const groups, and that's going to be equal to, and I'm just going to grab this first part. Just grab our data join. Cut that and paste it up here. And we're going to say const groups equals this.svg, select all group tags, select all Gs, dot data, root.leaves. Now remember, root comes from that pack layout. So we've selected the leaves from this. And now underneath, const leaf equals groups, right? We just plugged that in, that variable we just made, groups.enter. And so now, before we do a group.enter, we can do groups.exit, and everything that's removing, or everything that's exiting, we can explicitly remove. So we've done that. I hit save, it formatted. Let's see if that gets us closer. So we'll uncheck Duke. UNC disappeared. Okay. Uncheck UNC. Wake Med disappeared. Uncheck Wake Med. So we see we're getting some reaction, but it is not right. Now, when we view the data, notice we're clicking and things are just all kind of clobbered up in here. Remember, we made that key. And that key attribute is very important. We haven't done anything with it yet. But that helps D3 know which elements are tied to which pieces of data. So right now it's a big jumbled mess. So here, these groups, look at this data bind. We're binding root leaves. So we'll just come over here, and it says right here, key is a D3 value function. So we're just passing in a function. It explains it here in the documentation, an optional key function, which is evaluated for each selected element. So we're just going to stub in an arrow function here. It's going to take D, it's going to be our shorthand argument for datum. Now, because this is root.leaves, this isn't just our array of data. This is our hierarchical array of data. So this is wrapped up in a wrapper. So we have to say d.data.key. And so now we'll hit save on that. Come back over here. So we re-rendered. And I'm going to uncheck UNC. Check UNC, put it back. That looks right. How about Wake Med? Now, it's getting rid of the correct schools or correct hospitals. So when we uncheck Duke, we get rid of Duke. When we uncheck UNC, we get rid of UNC. And when we uncheck Wake Med, we get rid of Wake Med. Unfortunately, it's just leaving this giant gap, right? So this is kind of boring. It'd be great if this would redraw correctly, right? And take up the full space we have available. So when these groups change, notice we have two explicit functions here. We have exit and we have enter. By default, if we just chain something onto groups right here, that's when it updates. That's when we do something with the groups that are still in place. So here, when we enter, we append a group and then we transform that group. We can just copy this transform and paste it right here on the end of this. And so now we can say, oh, and when you update groups that are already there, hey, apply this transformation. So now we'll go back. And so we'll uncheck, let's uncheck Wake Med. Oh, so now it's redrawn. But something's still not right. Look at all that white space. Look at all the negative space in between all those circles. Let's turn Wake Med back on and put it back. So it still looks kind of okay. Let's get rid of UNC. Let's get rid of Wake Med. So when we just have one visible, there's way too much space. It hasn't actually accurately repacked all of this data. And we put everything back in, our spacing's all messed up. We see some circles overlapping here. This is definitely not right. So we've adjusted the positioning. That's what this does. We've adjusted the positioning of the groups. But if you look at what we do, after we call groups.enter and append a G, this gets returned, and that's what leaf is. Leaf is this group. So then we append a circle into that group, and we set the radius attribute. So we need to do that as well every time we update. So in order to do that, keep in mind what groups is. Groups is a select all G. So we've selected all of the group tags, and we've done this data binding. So we are transforming all of the group tags, which lines up here with line 6970, but underneath the radius is set to a circle, and that's an element that's appended to that group. So here we just have to say, we have to say groups.select. So we're selecting, we already have the group, but we want to select the circle element inside of that group. And then we'll just paste in this same code down here. We're just resetting that radius to whatever the updated data is. Now notice we're using dx, dy, dr. Again, that's because we've done this pack layout. That x and y positioning and the radius, that's what this pack layout gives us. And so then we're doing root.leaves, so we're getting all of these elements out that we're able to draw. So I'm going to save this file, go back over. I'm going to uncheck UNC. Oh, that looks better already. I'm going to uncheck Duke. Oh, that's much better. So the white space is tightened up. The circles are taking up a lot more space. Let's add Duke back in. I don't see anything overlapping. Let's add UNC back in the mix. I don't see anything overlapping. So let's come up here. We've got our data. We're pulling out of the state data. Let's do, I don't know. Can we do this here? Let me think. This may work. Let's do a D3 dot shuffle data. And I'm curious. So it draws it shuffled. Uncheck UNC. Yeah, that looks good. Uncheck that. So we're just looking at Duke. We can look at Duke and Wake Med. We can look at Duke at UNC. We can look at just UNC. And if we turn all three back on, yeah, I like that. Now, it's not particularly useful. So I do like the idea of what we talked about previously. I'm going to plug one of those sort functions back in. So I'm going to say data.sort, and it's A, B. It gets past, the sort gets past two things. And then we are going to parse int minus parse int. So I'm just stubbing in my code. So we're going to parse, we want to take the bigger one, the second one that would be passed into it. So we're going to do parse int b dot avg price minus parse int a dot avg price. And so we'll save that. So I'm just doing a sort here, bigger to smaller, puts the bigger ones in the middle. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, and I think from a user perspective, that's going to be a lot more useful for keeping track of. When we have all of this data in here, you're probably just going to care about what the most expensive ones are. And then you could kind of come out to the fringe to look for some of the less expensive options. And you can always drill in here by school to get those outside fringe ones a little easier. Of course, we could make that an option too, right? We could make this pluggable where the user, picks sort by most expensive, sort by least expensive, and it will turn this inside out because all we need to flip here is just if it sorts A, B, we just turn that around, turn around the parameters B, A, and then we've turned it inside out, and now the bigger ones are around the fringe. So I'll put it back. We'll leave that as A, B. So we have our sort in here. I don't really see anything else wrong. It'd be nice. We do something neat here. So let's do, before we wrap this up, where's our enter? So we have groups, enter G, transforms. Let's just throw a transition in here and see what that looks like when it enters. Oh. Transition, transform. What was it mad about? Class is not a function. Wasn't happy about me putting the transition in there. So maybe we'll just do it on the update. So let's throw a transition, a dot transition on update. That's neat. Kind of draws. It's pretty fast. Moving stuff around there. Let's come up here. We'll just make a const t equals d3 dot transition dot duration, and let's go with 800 milliseconds. And so now that we've got that t transition, we can plug that in as configurable. And so now, oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that. So we do some transitions, kind of see things moving around. You could probably throw that same transition on the radius adjustment as well. I feel like it made that appear a little slower. Yeah, I'm going to take that back out on the second one. So we'll save that. I'm just going to leave it on the positioning. So that's cool. So now we've got some filtering plugged in there. We got a nice transition. And I think we're ready to just move on at this point. We will work on our tooltips now in the next video when we hover over one of these, actually displaying some sort of information